Hello, everyone, and welcome to another CannX webinar for 2021, the last one for this year. Wherever you are on the globe, I hope you're doing well and keeping yourself safe. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Yuval Zolotov, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Just before diving into today's webinar, I would like to remind you that in March 2022, which is just in a couple of months, we are going to have an in-person edition of the CannX conference, which will be held here in Tel Aviv, Israel. We assembled a distinguished list of speakers for you, and please visit our website to see more details about the program and about our faculty. And now, I'm happy to move on to the webinar of today. The title of the webinar is Cannabis, a Friend or a Foe, an Evidence-Based Debate. I'm not sure how many of you participated in our previous webinars, but today we have quite a special format. So the use of cannabis for treatment of different medical conditions is constantly increasing in many places around the world. And while evidence is accumulating to support the integration of cannabis into healthcare, this process is still in its infancy. And despite the therapeutic potential of cannabis and cannabinoids, this treatment modality remains associated with numerous uncertainties and controversies. And at the same time, legalization of cannabis for adult use is enacted in more and more places and considered in other jurisdictions. And this trend is associated with even more health-related concerns, both in the individual level and for public health in general. In today's webinar, two distinguished physicians will carry out an evidence-based debate about the pros and cons of medical cannabis. After a short presentation by each of the speakers, they will run a short debate on several points related to medical cannabis. And just one housekeeping message before moving ahead to present the speaker. We welcome your questions. Please use the Q&A function of Zoom for sending them to us. And since this is a debate, I encourage you all to keep in mind that we are here to learn. And while listening to the speakers, maybe try to forget your previous opinions and be open-hearted. We aim to stimulate the critical thinking of all of us and perhaps even doubt our predispositions or even change our minds. So we are now going to kick off the debate with a one-question poll. Please let us know your opinions, and it's your time to vote now. Just give you a few more seconds to give us your answers. And so I'm happy now to move to presenting our first speaker, Dr. Leslie Mendoza Temple, who is joining us today from Illinois, the United States. Dr. Temple is a clinical associate professor for North Shore University Health Systems Department of Family Medicine and medical director of the North Shore Integrative Medicine Program. She was recently appointed as an endowed chair of integrative medicine by the Owen L. Kuhn Foundation. She is also a clinical associate professor in family medicine at the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine. And from 2014 to 2016, Dr. Temple served as chair of the Medical Cannabis Advisory Board for the Illinois Department of Public Health. Dr. Temple will defend the thesis of cannabis as a friend. So now please welcome Dr. Leslie Mendoza Temple. Leslie, hi, please, the stage is yours.
Hi, thank you. Don't start my clock yet. I'm going to get my screens up, but I'll have to get the privilege to share. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Here I go. Sharing my screen. Set my timer. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Well, good morning in Chicago. Let me just get this going here. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So today we're going to talk about, by the way, I have no disclosures. Thank you for the introduction. And also thank you for bringing your beginner's mind, your learner's mind to see what is this very complex substance. What does it mean to me in my practice or as a user or as a policymaker? there's so much. There is my answer to friend or foe is, I think it's mostly a friend, but it can be a foe in some cases that can be overcome with good education. So that's what we're going to, Dr. Lycan and I will attempt to do in a nice debate. So I'm going to talk about the background of why is this so important. So we've got an opioid epidemic. We do have research that there's a therapeutic basis for using cannabis. And a little bit about risks on my end, just to acknowledge that I know there are those, and we have to educate our patients that there are challenges with quality control, but there's progress being made, as well as labels in improving the safety of this substance to people who use it. And then I will have my opinion fest later on, so hang on to that. Why is cannabis so relevant today? Is that, well, by necessity, we've had, before the pandemic that we're in now, we're still having an opioid or narcotic pandemic, a crisis that's actually gotten way worse since the pandemic started. So here, and this is old data already, all the way through to 2014, looking at the number of opioid-related deaths, male and female, you can see here that they have climbed over the years. I couldn't find a most recent slide on that, but you can see that the trend has been increasing on prescription opioids. The heroin, which is the next step up, is also has skyrocketed as well. And within the pandemic we have, this is the latest data published in November of 2021, last month by the CDC, that we see an increase of almost 29% in opioid or drug overdose deaths in the US. And this is from all drugs, actually. So there's clearly something very, very amiss during this time. That is a lot of people in the past year. 29% increase in anything, we have to pay attention to that. Just as a sign of to give proper respect to the dangers of opioids. We can't forget that this is a cannabis debate, but we have to frame it within that larger house of people are using many different substances. Here's a police officer who actually just touched someone who had some fentanyl on themselves, and he went in total medical crisis. So just keeping in mind, it doesn't take much, just takes one very bad interaction with an opioid, whether it's prescription or illegal, that you could die. So let's keep that in mind. This is a famous study that's been quoted oft times by pro-cannabis constituents about how there was about 25% lower annual opioid overdose mortality rate in the states that didn't have medical cannabis laws. Did I say that correct? 25% reduction in opioid overdoses in the states that actually had cannabis laws. Sorry, that to me, that should be changed. That if you can save 25% more lives from opioid overdoses in the states that had cannabis laws in it, that says something. But the thing with this particular study, one of the biggest critiques of it is that it doesn't imply that that's the reason. This is not a cause and effect kind of study. It's just a look at this interesting relationship between lower deaths from opioids in states that have medical cannabis. So this begs the question that we need to research it more. And a lot of the research that people are drawing from come from these kinds of ecologic studies. So we have to, as a researcher, really understand the merits of studies like this and how much conclusion can you make of all of that. So when we look at how bad cannabis is in relation to other substances, you can see here with the comparison of psychoactive drugs, you see here cannabis or marijuana down in the moderate low category. We've got heroin all the way up here. Look at where nicotine is, alcohol. Look at the difference in terms of how much it takes to achieve lethality and how much the dependence potential is. And another intriguing substance for another time is the psilocybin and the psychedelics. That's for another time. So again, a lot of these things need research. Interestingly, look at caffeine. Worse than cannabis in terms of dependence potential a little bit there. So, well, maybe not so much, but it's just very interesting to see the differences in substances. So remember, we're always putting this in context of other things. And in terms of addiction rates, these can be debated here, but When you look at lifetime risk of addiction to nicotine, heroin, cocaine, alcohol, and cannabis, I always use that 9% risk of, when I talk to patients, you have a 9% risk of developing a serious problem with this. But if you use it when you're younger, as a kid, young teenager, your rate could climb to 17%. And that's when we see problems, a lot more problems happening in the younger folks who are using this frequently. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you try cigarettes, you have a almost 1/3 chance of getting hooked on it. That's pretty bad. So anyway, keep in context all of this. Why is cannabis a potentially therapeutic? Why is it a therapeutic substance? Is that we have our own homemade endogenous endocannabinoid system that helps us do these things: relaxing, eating, sleeping, protecting, forgetting pain, all the things that we need moment to moment to help us survive or to help us have a quality of life. So our body knows exactly when to release certain amounts and when you need other kinds of cannabinoids to do these functions. So when I hear clinicians or other folks say there's no research that cannabis works, you can tell them they haven't been reading, because there is research that it works, but it is still in development. And I found this very interesting article looking at evidence mapping. It's a little bit of a complex thing, but each bubble in the plot, I'm going to dizzy your minds with the bubbles, but each bubble is a systematic review that met their quality parameters. And the size of the bubble is the number of participants. And this group, Monteros Oleas et al., looked at different types of conditions. For instance, multiple sclerosis, looking at whether the evidence in this particular study with 720 participants. In the red here, it looked unclear. Oral cannabis extract, THC, CBD versus placebo and spasticity. They looked at one aspect of its clarity, but then in another area, they found that it can be possibly beneficial. It's a little bit of a confusing thing, but you can see that there is research just by the presence of a dot. And then you can see, look at all of the areas here where they thought cannabis could be probably beneficial, with beneficial being the highest. So you can correlate, if you look up the study, you can actually correlate the dot with which study it was. So for instance, 991 or 993 patients found in the study maybe had some benefit with respect to tremor, although these color codes might be belonging to different studies. But you can see also there's some probably harmful and harmful categories. So this is just one condition, and they have pain. They've looked at fibromyalgia. The results are all over the board, but I was surprised, and happily surprised, to see lots of probably beneficial dots in many of these plots. Regarding cannabis use and driving impairment, there are several meta-analyses that found that the risk of being involved in a crash significantly increased after cannabis use. And in a few cases, the risk doubled or more than doubled. We have to pay attention to that. And any substance that promotes or hinders your reactivity, your ability to brake really fast or to react in unimaginable situations, you have to be quick on that. So if you're on gabapentin, which is a prescription non-opioid medication, or benzodiazepine, or cannabis, or alcohol, all of these things can involve crash risk. And but I thought this was interesting, that a large case control study conducted by our own National Highway Traffic Safety Administration found no significant increased crash risk attributable to cannabis after they looked at the driver's age, gender, race, and presence of alcohol. So what I've seen in the kind of these pro-con, like these vicious debates I see, the super anti and the super pro people, it's just, use it with caution, and just know that depending on what study you look at, you could build a case either way. My view is, don't drive under the influence of any substance that alters your ability to drive safely, and that we need more studies. But I don't use this as just a way to say we should just ban it altogether. Crashes go up. We have to look at it in the big context of much more dangerous substances that also cause crashes. Another issue that comes up is quality control, and is there any? It's evolving, but it's flawed. This is an example, or this is a picture of the first day that the recreational cannabis dispensaries opened up in Illinois. We will have these slides for you later, but these are some brands. This is a privateconsumerlab.com company that looks at CBD content and ranks them in terms of their content on the label and heavy metals. So I just put those there for your benefit. I know I'm going to go really fast through that. And in Illinois, we have our traceability system here looking at where the what's the quality control on the plants that are grown in our Illinois cultivation centers and sent to the dispensaries. But recently we had some pretty telling things about quality control in our own backyard. And so this needs to be looked at in terms of mold and other problems, contaminants, making it into the cannabis that's in a legal dispensary. So I think that's very interesting. It means we need to keep on our vigilance up. And regarding labels, this is what you usually see with THC and CBD. I think that's all. I mean, that's some minimal information that we need. This is clearly a predominant THC product, but something that's been proposed by Dr. David Nathan and Eli Nathan, looking at a much more sophisticated and helpful label. So this was taken up in this, and in particular safety symbols. This was recently adopted in Montana, that we need to have safety labels to show, hey, this has cannabis in it, so, and THC. So we need to be very careful about a product that looks like it's harmless. So we need to make that clear. We have cannabinoid pharmaceuticals like Epidiolex for epilepsy and Sativex, which is in trials here in the US, but available in Europe. Cannabis is expensive, though. If you were going to use the prescription drug, it is expensive, but the prescription drugs are very, very expensive. So although it would be nice to say everyone should get the stuff from the pharmaceutical world, look at the costs. And just from a pharmaceutical world, here's a throwback from way back when, before prohibition happened. And so the dark side of cannabis will be presented by Dr. Lycan. So he's the Darth Vader, I'm the Princess Leia. And I just want to acknowledge this is very important to go through, but he will spend more time on this. And I wrote a paper on this with my colleagues on cannabis in the early days of the cannabis law. So this is why I find cannabis to be a friend, is because it actually helps people. And these are the people. These were posted with permission. These are my patients. Life-changing. So we cannot deny the potential of this therapeutic substance when it's done correctly. This is my favorite slide. This is my lovely youngest patient that I've ever certified. He's now 14 years old, playing soccer and living his life after a brain tumor. So I just want to leave that with you. I will have my rebuttal and my opinion fest after Dr. Lycan's portion. So I believe, don't forget, I have to put a plug in for integrative medicine, that cannabis isn't the only thing, that we have to have a healthy lifestyle, good diet, and stress management practices so that we can get through. But cannabis has really taken my patients to that next level. This is my team. We are in the north suburbs of Chicago, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Temple, for the interesting presentation and for meeting the short time of the allocated for your talk. So thank you for that. And if you have any questions at this point, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will address the questions in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And I'm now very happy to present our second speaker for today, Dr. Gerald Lakin. Dr. Lakin is an adjunct clinical professor on the Division of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences and the Occupational and Environmental Medicine Service at UI Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and a professor of medicine at Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science in North Chicago, Illinois. Dr. Lakin is board certified in internal medicine, emergency medicine, medical toxicology, and addiction medicine. He has published more than 200 articles in peer-reviewed medical journals. In this debate, he will defend the thesis of cannabis as a foe. So now please welcome Dr. Gerald Lakin. Please, Jerry, stage is now yours.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so basically, I'm a medical toxicologist. Cannabis has been sweeping the nation as far as legal cannabis goes, but focus on the states in the Southeast, because though there's the states that deal with specifically with legal CBD and have cannabis limits of THC of 1% or less in the sense overall. And it appears that the goal overall to normalize cannabis from medical cannabis to recreational cannabis to elimination of cannabis from employment drug testing programs. This is a problem that I see with cannabis being used in the workplace. More to the point, cannabis during the COVID epidemic or pandemic has become a quote, an essential business. 33 states across the U.S. allow for some sale and consumption of cannabis, but when the 27 states with stay-at-home orders in effect have allowed cannabis operations to remain open to make it an essential business. And note that these states that have allowed it and the states that have not allowed or called cannabis, and especially recreational cannabis, an essential business, are the same states that essentially limit THC and are basically CBD-based laws. In fact, I'm not against cannabis laws. I'm against cannabis laws that don't limit THC in this way overall. And look at what's going on in Illinois. In the first 12 months of operation of recreational cannabis, it has exploded as far as the amounts used in the sense, and the amounts sold in the sense. In fact, in June of 2021, there were 2.5 million individual cannabis sales in a state of 12.8 million. There was also, so as a result, we saw almost a 14-fold increase in pediatric exposures, mostly edible exposures, called into our poison center, Illinois Poison Center, with 150 exposures, 5 being severe. Traffic fatalities have increased in Chicago and Illinois by 45%, 15% respectively. This is after 12 years of going down as far as traffic fatalities. So I believe there is a correlation between recreational cannabis being legalized in Illinois and these statistics in a sense. Look at the infants. We're seeing infants ingesting edible cannabis. This is a study of 10 infants aged 8 to 20 months, enormous plasma and urine THC levels. These are their symptoms overall. All of them recovered within 72 hours in this sense. But it was a very scary situation for these infants getting into the candies in this sense. And some of these candies, while there are laws to restrict as far as the appearance of these and not make it look like candies, at the beginning, they did look like candies. I authored a resolution to pass a policy against edibles. I don't believe edibles or cannabis-infused products, such as gummy bears or brownies, should exist. We've been teaching at the Poison Center essentially for the last 40 years that medicine is not candy, and this breaks that rule overall. Leslie touched on the quality control, of which I don't think there is any quality control, and certainly you can't compare it to medicines in this sense. There's fungus contamination as much as 1,000 colony forming units in the state of Illinois. It's higher in some other states before it's looked at. There's almost no such thing as recalls or consumer alerts. I love pointing out this sentence. I don't think it's reasonable for the general public to think that everything is 100% clean and safe. And then he goes on to talk about, this is from Andrew Arso, which was a manager for the Oregon Health Authority. In other words, he does not have the same opinion as medical cannabis as any other medications used in the United States, which we believe has to be virtually 100% clean and safe in this sense. We know we can't achieve that, but that is our goal in this sense. So there is no quality control. In this study, 69% of CBD products were mislabeled with the wrong dosage, and the dosage was much less, and the pesticide false negative rate was 78%. The conclusion here was cannabis is medicine, test it like medicine. In this sense, there is no essentially standardization of labeling overall, as you can see. I mean, I don't even know how a consumer would interpret this labeling in this sense. But the basic problem I see with legislatures as such is that this is the most important slide. Everything they believe that can be toxic, but cannabis is believed to be non-toxic, which is absolutely wrong. And it breaks one of the basic points of toxicology. Look at our Poison Center, actually the United States Poison Center data for cannabis. In 1999, before all these laws took into effect, we got less than 2,000 calls, of which 1,300 were treated in healthcare facilities, essentially those numbers on the right were in ICUs, and you can see how it exploded during when these laws became legalized, in a sense. And this includes the pharmaceuticals, and this is about 20% adolescent exposures, because there are acute effects to cannabis, which are hyperadrenergic in nature, can be psychosis. We're seeing all sorts of different things in emergency rooms and ICUs. I see too much comparison to alcohol. The bottom line is that metabolism is very complicated, unlike alcohol. And when Leslie shows about the fact that cannabis is less toxic, one of the other aspects is that it's unpredictable. Its metabolism is totally unpredictable, unlike alcohol, unlike most of the other drugs that are psychogenic, which have very predictable metabolism and can predict when it's going to finish as far as the effects. Cannabis is very unpredictable. That's the problem overall. There is no exception to this rule. It's a dose that makes the poison. It doesn't matter what the substance is. It's a dose that makes the poison. Cannabis is no exception. In fact, you look at higher doses. Leslie showed the stuff about addiction, about the 9%. But also, if you use cannabis at a young age at a higher dose, initiating at 5% or 12%, you're at 12%. There's a 5 times risk for a cannabis use disorder symptom onset within a year. Overall. Remember the slides I showed with the Southeast versus the West. The West has very liberal cannabis laws. They're seeing much more emergency department visits by cannabis than the Southeast overall. So this is translating to what we're seeing in emergency departments in a sense. And the Heart Association just last year started coming out saying that recommends people do not smoke or vape any substance and advocates including cannabis to tobacco control and prevention efforts due to the increased risk of strokes and increased risk of MI 6% under the age of 50 years old. Overall, we're seeing new diseases. We never saw cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. This is our study at Evanston Hospital in the sense of 15 patients between ages 16 and 22. The average weight loss was 2.3 kilograms, and they had enormous cannabis levels. In a sense. So we're seeing new diseases that we didn't see before. And one of the new ones was E-Valley, which was not electronic cigarettes. It was due to cannabis cartridges in this way, with the contaminant being vitamin E acetate, causing massive lung symptoms that are similar to what we're seeing with COVID in this sense. This is one of my patients gave me medical cannabis, 1 gram of cartridge that she was going through every day. This is a cannabis overdose. It's chronic use. That's the problem. We're seeing psychosis. This is our study of psychosis at Highland Park Hospital. These individuals were completely hyperadrenergic, combative, agitated, and sedation took 5 hours to achieve. We used dexmedetomidine. All of them had enormous cannabis levels in a sense. Cannabis in pregnancy is also going to be an issue because it's been used as for morning sickness. But basically, what we're seeing is, while there's no neonatal withdrawal and it's not teratogenic, there are lower mean birth weights. It appears to be these children are more anemic, and the science is quite incomplete. Not only that, there's one study shows that an infant death syndrome odds ratio is double. So, in conclusion, marijuana toxicity is being increasingly encountered everywhere. Cumulative effects is the problem, and that leads to serious neurotoxicity. Its pharmacokinetics are not predictable in the sense that psychosis is difficult to diagnose and treat, and may be a risk factor for violent crimes. So, I can go on and on about this, why the pharmacology is not predictable. Target organs of brain. We're seeing toddlers and adolescent use increasing. Duration impairments are prolonged after the subjective effects dissipate. There's no patient education on this. We're seeing poison center data, which is reflective of all these problems in the sense that there's no ceiling on the THC dose. We're going to see more synthetics being used, just like with the opioid epidemic. The problem with the opioid epidemic is fentanyl. It's not prescription use. And so we're going to see more synthetic use, just like that parallels that of the opioid epidemic. Its reported effects are nebulous. It only directly affects the pathophysiology of one disease, glaucoma. There's no therapeutic drug monitoring. There's no titration. It's being over-promoted. No drug is good for 40 or 50 different things. In a sense, medical use and recreational use cannot be distinguished analytically. These laws, I think, directly promote smoking, actually, in this way. There's no product labeling standards. There's no quality control. in the sense the impurities aren't adequately identified. Adverse pregnancy effects are going to be seen. Overall, we're seeing new diseases. It's difficult to, medical examiners and coroners can't even diagnose, don't have the specifics to diagnose issues with that. And so I believe the risk outweigh the benefits for general population routes. I'm not saying there are no benefits. There are benefits, but I think the risk outweigh that because unintended consequences occur. You can't be anti-vaping, anti-smoking, and pro-cannabis. So we're seeing a toxic surge that's legislatively iatrogenic, similar to prescription opioid epidemic. Because I believe government is protecting the cannabis business. Look at E-Valley, which they blamed on electronic cigarettes, but it was due to cannabis and essentially calling it an essential business. So legalization can generate revenue, but its widespread health and society implications are unclear. And this is a preventive medicine talk. Preventive medicine is never politically correct. And so I'm happy to turn it over to
Great.
Leslie.
Great,
Okay,
thank you very much. So yeah, just to tell the audience that now we're going to have a short rebuttal, meaning that each of the speakers will have a short time to comment on the presentations of his colleague. So first, Dr. Terpel will be commenting on the presentation of Dr. Lakin. Please, Leslie.
Okay, I dread the bell. Okay, so I had to put it in slides. There's so much to say, Jerry. After caring for 625 patients in my practice, I would say I have the street knowledge, the on-the-ground knowledge to know that it's overwhelmingly done more benefit than harm. With proper education, you can circumvent a lot of these perils that Jerry talks about. And we also have to be careful that we don't conflate illegal sources of cannabis with things from the medical dispensary world, which is not perfect, but is definitely, I have not seen the data of E-Valley injuries coming from medical cannabis sourced vape, so we can debate that. We also need to be careful we don't conflate synthetic, invented cannabis related products that have been causing lots of problems in the ERs and saying that's also part of the whole medical group. It's really, I have a strong aversion to that conflation. And so since 2015, of those patients I've certified, 4 have been to the ER for side effects. 15 of them stopped using cannabis because of the cost, or they didn't like how they felt. They had side effects. I have watched and helped manage the reduction of opioids, sleep medications, and benzodiazepines. It happened a lot faster on cannabis than my therapies, the other wonderful therapies I had alone. Altogether, sheer willpower isn't going to do it. You need something stronger, but not under good guidance. You need it. And it's hard to find physicians who are willing to manage opioid pain management. The wait list to see a doctor is so long, and we've created this group of patients that need more help. And so we need options, and cannabis was just next best step. And the collateral effects, we also need to look at benefits in terms of cancer modulation. There's a lot of hype out there too that needs proof, but I think it's pretty promising. And so we need more. And I had a couple of observant people on the call here about the Shover study. So I will mention that too, that the reversal, so the Bakuber trend says that 25% of patients didn't die as much in the cannabis states. And then the Shover study showed that later on, no, that trend reversed. And so it's like, oh my goodness, what's right anymore? And in the end, you have to go with actually the research that says, okay, let's do real trials and not be retrospective and conflate the illegal cannabis usage. There's so much out there about, yes, it helps. No, it doesn't help. So this is one of those instances. So thank you for bringing that up. I added that the last minute. Pregnancy in child and teen use must be, at this point, heavily discouraged. I agree with Jerry there until we have more research. No driving of operating heavy machinery. These are things that are in our Venn diagrams altogether. Remember that the addiction can occur 9% of the time, and we have had increase in pediatric toxic exposure. So lock your stuff up. But keeping cannabis underground and illegal undermines our efforts to combat drug abuse. Prohibition has failed. We need to take advantage of the opportunities for patient education with the tax revenue that theoretically we'll be getting for all of this versus the way things are done now. So we have to look at the reality that also, I think, imposing legal limits on THC just isn't going to work. It's how would you manage that? I have patients who don't do well on high CBD. They need a significant amount of THC to get their therapeutic response. As long as they're doing it at home and they're not going out and driving later, as long as they're safe, that's fine. And if you do impose legal limits on THC, you're just going to have more crazy stuff being hooked up on the street, and people showing up with their hemorrhaging and their very, very strange or lethal side effects in the ER. So the more limits you put on something, human nature will invent something to get around that. Cannabis prohibition is also deeply rooted in institutionalized and systemic racism in the US, and much work still needs to be done. So considering, I'm not sure how much time I have left.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I have to cut
okay.
you off, right? And we'll
hopefully
have more time for that later.
All right, I will continue. There's so much. I will.
You just have to be mindful of the time, so I'm sorry for that.
Thank you.
Now is your time to comment on Leslie's didactic presentation.
The problem with Leslie is that she's too good a physician. She is the exception to the rule. She follows her patients very closely. Most physicians, as Leslie knows, that authorize cannabis, at least in the state of Illinois, in the country, just give them the authorization and that's it. There is no titration. No one is getting levels. No one knows what the therapeutic level is. No one knows as far as spotting the adverse effects. As far as driving, no one can say if you smoke or vape cannabis, when can you drive again? In this sense, unlike alcohol, which is very predictable in this sense. So the fact that there is no titration available makes this very limited for pain control, in a sense. And the problem, looking at the opioid epidemic, what the opioid epidemic taught us is that people want more tolerance overall. People get tolerance. They want more potency. That's why it's gone to fentanyl, synthetics. The cannabis is from a plant. There's only so much potency you can get. People will be in the 2025 years, will be going to synthetics. It's going to be a synthetic cannabis problem, which started with this. And because people will want more potency due to tolerance. They get tolerant to psychogenic drugs. This is what we've seen with the opioid epidemic transferring to fentanyl. 64% of all opioid deaths is now fentanyl. Overall, it's not prescription pain medication. So it's totally different. Now, regarding illicit drug use, illegal cannabis, and it's interesting, in California, legal cannabis still brings in more revenue than legal cannabis because of this potency issue. Overall, people are going to want to get more potent, absolutely. So these are the issues that I see. Again, I see the problems with this. I can speak for 4 hours against aspirin. So I don't speak about the benefits, I talk about the risks. And these are the risks that are documented that we are seeing. We're going to see more workplace accidents because we cannot predict when you are no longer impaired by cannabis in a safety sensitive position, when you're fit for duty. It's more than 4 hours. Studies have shown it could be as long as 11 to 16 hours after you, and we don't know as far as a cumulative effect. With cannabis, with a half-life of THC half-life of double-digit hours, there is a cumulative effect if you take it more than once a day. So I'm going to turn it over. I can go on, but in interest of time, I'm going to turn it over to Ural.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jerry. So now I invite you both to debate shortly on some more specific issues that are related to medical cannabis. And each of you, please take a maximum 2 minutes to outline your opinion. And so the first question that I have to both of you is the following. Do you think that levels of THC should be limited? And whoever wants to start, please feel free to do so.
Maybe I'll go. Okay, thank you. So that I actually touched on that earlier, that limiting THC, I think that it's part of that sort of artificial prohibitionists. We think we can control it. I just think it's impractical. Yes, I would like my patients not to use high levels of THC, but if you eliminate that possibility, it will, as a clinician who's using it therapeutically, we are going to be handcuffed. I really have found that if you go with, I would love everyone to just be on high CBD and be happy with it. But having had enough patients tell me, okay, I've been at this now for 4 or 5 years, I find that I need the higher THC. If I have to say, well, they don't make it, they're going to go somewhere else. And guess where that somewhere else will be? Will be some person who says, I'm cooking up something really great in my garage kitchen. So I'm more of that kind of practical point of view. If we have people understand that the more THC you use, the more intoxicating it is. That's a common approach. Jerry and I are, I would say, both on the same page with that. But if you arbitrarily limit it, what is the limit then? And in terms of testing levels, there isn't anything that's agreed upon in the outpatient world. Like if I send out a cannabis level on someone, I get it back in a week. That doesn't help me today. So he and I have actually talked about good testing, like technology and ways you can do real-time levels using technology that isn't mainstream and truly available. So I think this is where we have some potential for collaboration here on when you do levels, what's accepted, we don't know. But limiting THC, I think, would be a mistake, but we have to do that with good education and labeling.
All right, thank you. And now, please go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, well, first of all, just about every other psychogenic drug has potency limits. Nicotine, which is not really psychogenic but addicting, has potency limit of 500 micrograms. Alcohol has potency limits. I mean, beer can only be a certain amount, wine can only be a certain amount. So virtually everything that's legal psychogenic and addictive has potency limits. More to the point, I have authored, as Leslie knows, a resolution at the State Medical Society to have a potency limit of 10% overall. That's actually Vermont in May of 2022 will essentially put through a potency limit. So some states are starting to do this. In the sense, as I mentioned, in the Southeast, there are potency limits already overall. And part of the potency limits does two things. Number one, it establishes a cap so that the user knows what the potency is. And number two, it establishes quality control overall, because the potency has to be analyzed. It has you cannot say potency of 10% or something like that. What in the resolution is that there has to be quality control in cannabis. And with potency, if in any other medication, if you go to the store and get ibuprofen 200 milligrams, it's not 202, it's not 203, it's 200 overall. I do quality control for several drug companies. And this is what we look at. It has to be precise. There has to be absolute precision in medical cannabis. And I mean absolute precision in this sense. We can't say about or approximately 10%. That's because how do you titrate? How do you determine cause and effect or risk benefit or anything like that if you don't know precisely? And that's the key word here, precisely the dose. And there is no precise dose with this.
I think what's hard about that is that everybody, even on the same precise dose, will have very different reactions. And that's where I feel, having seen patients, sorry, I'm going out of turn. I apologize. Okay. Sorry. I lost my train of thought. But anyway, I think having your argument that people build up tolerance and they need more and more. If you limit THC, then you're also eliminating a greater therapeutic potential for whatever they medically need for this, for whatever they're dealing with. So it's kind of feels like, okay, I don't want it yet, let's limit it. It's confusing to me. I do think in the end, if we limit THC, we're going to create a new market. It's already been created on synthetics to get a bigger, better high. If you leave it out in the open and you regulate and you create or you reinforce safety standards on every spectrum of cannabis product out there, I think that would be much better and people can choose. So just like with alcohol, you've got your Bartles and James wine cooler, or there are people who want to drink Everclear. It's you should know that everyone knows Everclear is way more potent and really, really toxic for you, but it's out there. In some states, it's illegal. So give people that education, that knowledge. So, and discourage the use of high dose things. Yeah. if they don't
Great,
need it.
thank you very much, both. So another question that I have for both of you is, do you think that levels of, sorry, that was the first question. So the second question is, do you think that edibles should be banned or prohibited? And if so, why?
Do you
Want
want
to
to
go
go?
first?
Okay, I can go first. Again, I authored a resolution to ban it. As I said, I'm defining edibles as cannabis-infused products such, not capsules, not oral use, but cannabis-infused products such as brownies, gummy bears, candy, things like that. And as I said, we've been talking for decades at the poison control centers that medicine is not candy. I've seen too many people getting into these things, thinking a brownie is a brownie, thinking a gummy bear or candy is candy in this sense. That slide I showed from Colorado, overall, that's Joe Camel. Some of the older people know who Joe Camel was when to try to make it more accessible to younger people in this sense. We're seeing it 14 times, not 14 alone, but 14 times the amount of cannabis kids getting into cannabis, mostly toddlers, in this way. And so I believe edibles should absolutely be banned, just like it's banned for virtually any other drug. No one would put narcotics in brownies. No one would put potent medications in food products. And that's why I think this should absolutely be banned.
Okay, my turn.
Yes.
You're going to make probably 80% of my patients very upset if we banned edibles. It is a very efficient way and an effective way to get the cannabis into the system. What maybe I'm hearing is that we need to ban advertising to children and packaging that is poorly labeled and looks just like a regular brownie. That things should not be appealing to children and look like Joe Camel. For those of you, I think Joe Camel was everywhere, but that was making cigarettes look very enticing. So I agree. We need to make sure that, and the label that Dr. Nathan had come up with his son is brilliant, with the label all over the place, and don't make it look like it's appealing. If you say this is a medicine, yes, it's in the form of a little piece of a brownie to make it tolerable. That's one thing. Of course, we have capsules and liquids and such, but it's very, I don't know, I can't see my practice without having edibles in there. That would really hurt a lot of medical patients to take that away. But agree that we should be labeling it well and encouraging the low and slow approach. Never eat a whole edible on your first try. You've got to cut it into 4 pieces. I know that's not precise, Jerry, but cannabis medicine is not precise. THC, you and I take the same amount of edible, we can have very different reactions. So what if it's precise? If you're gonna, I end up in the ER because cannabis actually doesn't make me feel good. I don't use any of this stuff because it's just not my thing. Everyone's so different. That's what's really hard to study is I'd like to see people getting precise amounts of the same thing and you study the diversity of reactions in that. So banning edibles as well as limiting THC would be, I believe, totally impractical as well.
Great. So thank you very much. And before we're now going to move shortly to answer some questions, there's also a lively debate in the chat window, and which is nice to see. And we're also going to address some of the questions that the participants asked. But before doing so, let's do again the polling. So everyone is now going to be asked. I'm not sure if everyone who was originally here got it, but please answer the survey question that is now being popped up on your screen. We'll give you a few seconds, to vote.
Tubi, we had the first poll too. Some people were asking what was the vote.
Yeah, so let's not bias their answers.
Okay,
let's give them time to answer, and then we'll compare it with, I have the numbers here. So.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, it's more or less, or it's quite the same. I mean, we had 71% as a friend, voting for a friend before and now. And we had 10% as a foe before in the first poll and in the second. So it's actually the same numbers. We had 49 recorded answers, and now we have 62. So it's not the same people, but the proportions are the same. I'm not sure if people switch sides or not, but it is interesting to see that it's actually the same. So if you have anything to comment on that, please do, or we'll move to the Q&A.
My comment would be, the more I read about cannabis, the more I get confused. So if you come out of here and now even more confused, then you're on the right track.
And my comment is that we have to look at the toxicology aspects from all angles. The impairment, the medical examiners really have to do their job as far as getting the levels and interpreting the levels at the time of death overall. And clinicians ought to be looking at levels too, because they'll see a dose-effect relationship.
All right. So I'm sorry in advance for all of you that entered the questions. We're not going to be able to address all of them, but we are going to try do our best. So the first question is about the interactions between cannabis and other substances. Mm-hmm. So Andrea yes. Here says that the combination can bring out many of the worst aspects of both drugs. I'm not sure it's a question, but maybe if you want to address this quickly, any of you or both?
My quick is you take it separately. That's it. But I would say, yes, you have to be very wary. But I have patients who, they're on maximum doses of opioids. They're on gabapentin and a benzo. So they're already on a toxic soup of stuff. And when their pain is still terrible, I've used cannabis as a way to step down in a harm reduction type of model where we're going to use a less harmful substance and start ratcheting down those other substances to see if we can get a happy medium. Gives the patient a lot more autonomy and a feeling of control over the process. And I have seen patients get off of their medications or at least reduce them. So yes, take them separately, at least separated by 2 hours. You don't take your cannabis and your Norco at the same time, because then your additive effect can be bad. Jerry.
Let me try to be precise. Cannabis increases the hydroxylation of phenytoin in the hepatic, in the liver. So therefore, it increases the metabolism. I've seen individuals with who have been on normal levels or had levels of phenytoin in normal range. Once they start cannabis, it went down. So it can be in a way, it could be seizure-genic in those kind of individuals. That's another reason that levels both for cannabis and these other anti-seizure drugs have to be taken account. There's a 16-fold effect of impairment with cannabis and alcohol. It's not just synergistic, it's hugely synergistic in this way. And so the risk of being in an accident is 16-fold appears to be with the combination of cannabis and any amount of alcohol, even alcohol levels as low as 0.02. So there are, effects, but we're just in the embryonic stage of learning these drug interaction effects.
Yeah, I had that slide that showed that cannabis and driving, when you took alcohol out of the picture, the cannabis accidents rates were the same. So anyway, we need to study more, but don't mix the two. That's pretty common sense. Someone had brought up to the risk of harm reduction in breastfeeding and in pregnancy, that pregnant women may be using harder substances that are definitely bad for the fetus. And would cannabis, this is a conundrum. I'm not sure yet how I feel about that because I haven't had to encounter it, but we need research in that area as well, because you've got pregnant women who are on chronic pain medications or using heroin and other substances. I'm just posing a question. Would they be better off using cannabis? What's the effect going to be on the baby? Boy, it's already a tough situation as it is. So I don't know the answer to that yet, but these are the things that clinicians come up with all the time, and unanswerable right now.
Thank you both. So we're just going to take one more last question because we are running out of time. So the question that Ariel is asking is related to CBD. It's he or she, I don't know, mentioning that in Argentina, there's only CBD-based approved products. So the question is, what about the role of CBD products in pain treatment but I think you can maybe address, both of you can try to address your pro and con in the perspective of CBD-based products, but just please keep it short. I know it's a topic for a whole debate by itself, maybe.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jerry. Do you want to go?
Well, I can start. I mean, I was looking at CNN.com just early this morning, and there's an article, quote, medical marijuana and autism. I'm getting my boy back, mom says. That's by Natalie Argeling on CNN.com talking about CBDV. This is an example of overpromotion. That article talks about one case of a patient in a study that has not been published, that has not finished yet. Overall. And so this is an example of where I believe that it's being over promoted overall before all the data is in. Again, I think it's almost irresponsible to have a study like this before it's finished, before it's been analyzed, before it's been published, to be putting it out in the media overall. No responsible drug company would allow that sort of thing. In this way. And so and it talks about liver toxicity in that very article due to CBDV. And so I believe that it is being over promoted in the lay media irresponsibly.
So barring promotion or not promotion, CBD in and of itself, I have found to be valuable and helpful for patients who are dealing with pain, sleep, and mood issues with the lowest amount of THC possible. I'm not aware of CBDB. There are all of these different formulas, CBDA that's been made. There are even that whole world of THC8, THC10, THCO acetate. These are being cooked up from CBD, changed into totally different conformations and more potent amount of THC. I'm off topic a little bit, but we know we can make a lot of molecules from the different cannabinoids, and that it gets very confusing. You hear the press about it's bad, it's good. I would say overall, my experience is that CBD has been more helpful than harmful. And without or low amounts of THC, you reduce the amount of psychoactive or the amount of intoxication a person can feel. And I have seen it useful for patients trying to get off of medications. I have a patient who hasn't had a seizure in 6 years on CBD alone. I actually have 2 patients like that, and they were pretty bad off. I can't argue with real life anecdotes here. So the research is where it gets very confusing, and we start conflating the press and a research article released too early. I try not to get too wrapped up in that. I look at the patient in front of me and say, is this a good candidate? And what's a good source of CBD? I did give you that slide that showed Consumer Lab rating the CBDs very well. I think overall is very well tolerated and safe if you're getting it from a good source.
Great, thank you very much. I wish we had like a few more hours to.
So much more.
But we will find another opportunity for that. So again, I want to thank both of you, Dr. Temple and Dr. Lakin, for the educational and lively debate. Just 1 second, if you would let me share the screen. Yeah. So yes, okay, sorry.
I give an acknowledgement. It's not a debate thing. It's just I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Misha Kogan, Richard Israelowitz, you, Tubi Zolotov, Jerry Lykin, Kathy Kemper, for all of this work trying to promote a very well-rounded view of cannabis in education and in safety.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Leslie and others for helping bring out responsible cannabis use.
Great, thank you. And thank you to all the attendees from around the world for joining us today. And we hope to see you all joining the next webinars, and of course, waiting to see you in person in the main event of CannX, which will take place in Tel Aviv, March 14th, 15th. Please, you can use the email address to ask any questions that you may have. And be sure to register to the conference and prepare yourselves for this exceptional event. And we also take this opportunity to wish a Merry Christmas to all of you who are observing, and a healthy and happy 2022 to all. Please keep yourself safe wherever you are on the globe, and thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.